All my life, I held on to one simple belief that family love might not always look equal on the surface, but deep down it would balance out. I knew my parents weren't perfect. I knew my sister was always the one they adored more. People outside our home would call it normal favoritism, the kind every family has, where one child naturally receives more attention because of their personality, their achievements, or just the way they fit into their parents' expectations. But this wasn't the usual kind. My sister wasn't just loved a little more. She was treated like the center of their entire world, while I was left orbiting somewhere in the background, trying to convince myself that being invisible didn't hurt. When I was young, I thought it was just my imagination. I'd watch my mom clap the loudest when my sister sang at school events, or I'd see my dad beam with pride when she brought home a good grade. If I did the same, there was silence. A nod, maybe a small word of acknowledgement, but never the warmth I was craving. Still, I told myself, it's fine. They love her more, but they love me too. They must. They're my parents. As I grew older, the differences became harder to ignore. Birthdays were the clearest reminder. My sister's celebrations were grand, filled with friends, decorations, and gifts stacked so high the wrapping paper alone filled bags. Mine were quiet affairs, often forgotten until the last minute, with a card or a small present handed to me almost out of obligation. I remember once asking my mom why my birthday wasn't celebrated the same way, and she just smiled gently, saying, "Oh, honey, you don't need all that. You've always been more independent." That word, independent, haunted me. It was their polite way of saying, "You don't need us the way she does. You're fine without it." But I wasn't fine. No child is fine when they grow up feeling like a shadow in their own family. Despite all that, I never gave up hope, because deep inside, I clung to this idea. Parents may have favorites, but when it comes to the important things, the things that truly matter, they're fair. I believe that one day, in some big defining moment, I would see proof that I was just as important as my sister. Maybe they didn't show it every day, but in the end, they would do the right thing. That hope carried me through years of being overlooked. I told myself I'd get my moment. Maybe at my wedding, they'd surprise me with the same joy they showed when my sister got married. Maybe when I achieved something big, they'd finally clap for me the way they clapped for her. And when I thought about the distant future, I imagined that, if nothing else, when they were gone, their will would reflect a sense of fairness. I didn't mean money specifically. I meant acknowledgment. Something tangible, something lasting, that showed I wasn't forgotten. A necklace my mom wore, my dad's watch, maybe even just a letter written in their own handwriting. But when my parents passed, all that fragile hope shattered in ways I never could have prepared myself for. Walking into that lawyer's office was one of the most nerve-wracking moments of my life. My sister was composed, elegant, and oddly calm, as though she already knew how the script would play out. I, on the other hand, sat there with trembling hands, my stomach tight, and my chest heavy with a strange mixture of fear and expectation. I whispered to myself, "Don't think about the money. Don't think about the house or the land. Just hope for a sign that they remembered you too." The lawyer, a man with glasses perched low on his nose, shuffled papers and cleared his throat before speaking. His voice was measured, practiced, the kind of tone people use when they've done this 100 times. But to me, every word felt like it was being carved into stone. He began listing the assets. First was the family estate, our childhood home, sprawling and filled with memories both painful and sweet. It went to my sister. I clenched my fists under the table, but told myself, it's okay, maybe there's more. Then came the savings, the investments, the properties my father had worked his entire life to build. All of it. To my sister. I felt a strange buzzing in my ears, like the room itself was tilting. Still, I clung to the idea that my name was coming. Maybe not for the big things, but surely for something. Jewelry? A keepsake? Even a single sentence where they mentioned me? But the list went on, and my name was never spoken. By the time the lawyer finished, my heart was in pieces. I had been completely erased. Not $1, not one belonging, not even a note. Nothing. It was like my parents, in the final and most permanent decision of their lives, had said, "You do not exist to us. You never did." My chest ached, but it wasn't greed. People on the outside might think I was upset because of the fortune involved. $150 million. A sum so large it could change anyone's life. But no, that wasn't what broke me. What broke me was the realization that even when faced with their last chance to make things right, my parents had chosen not to. They had chosen her. Always her. I turned my head to look at my sister, desperate for some sign of compassion. Maybe she would look back with pity. Maybe she'd whisper that she'd share. Or maybe at the very least, she'd acknowledge how wrong it felt. But instead, she smiled. A slow, cold smile that told me all the decisions. It was not an accident. It was a plan. My parents had left everything to her and left me with nothing. In that moment, the room felt smaller, like the air itself had been sucked out. My body felt heavy, my throat burned, and tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Still, deep inside, something inside me broke forever. Because in one swift moment, with one set of documents read aloud, I lost not just an inheritance, but the very belief I had carried all my life. The belief that I mattered to my parents. And the truth hit me harder than any financial blow ever could. Sometimes the deepest wounds aren't caused by what we are denied, but by the love we realize we never had. I remember walking into the lawyer's office that morning, my hands trembling just a little as I clutched my purse. My sister, Amanda, was already seated, perfectly calm, her legs crossed like she was sitting for a photo shoot instead of hearing the final words of our parents. She wore her usual confident smile, the same one that always seemed to get her through life effortlessly, while I felt like I was just barely holding myself together. The office smelled faintly of polished wood and old books, and the shelves behind the lawyer's desk were filled with thick binders and files. It should have felt like a moment of respect and closure, but instead my stomach twisted with unease. I kept telling myself not to worry. Even though I'd always known Amanda was the favorite, deep down I thought, no, I trusted that my parents would still be fair when it mattered. I mean, they were gone now. This was their last chance to show me I mattered too. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. At first, it felt almost surreal, hearing the formal language, the last will and testament phrases, the legal tone. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to listen carefully, waiting for the moment my name would be spoken. But what came next was like being cut open without anesthesia. The estate. To Amanda. I blinked. My mind barely processed it. Okay, maybe that was just one thing. Maybe the next item would be mine, the house in Florida, to Amanda. A tiny crack opened in my chest. Still, I told myself to wait. The jewelry collection, to Amanda. The savings account, to Amanda. The land parcels, investments, and stocks, all to Amanda. By the time he finished, I wasn't even breathing. My name had never been spoken once, not once. It was like I didn't exist, like my life had been completely erased from their story. The silence in the room was heavy, almost mocking. Amanda leaned back in her chair, her eyes gleaming with a strange satisfaction. She didn't even glance at me. She just smiled faintly, the kind of smile that told me she had known all along. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask the lawyer if this was some kind of mistake. Maybe there was a second will or a trust set aside for me, or at least a single personal item left in my care. But when I opened my mouth, no words came out. My throat tightened, and instead I just sat there frozen, tears burning behind my eyes. For a moment, my memories started rushing back. All the times I had tried to win my parents' approval, all the times I had hoped they would see me, value me, love me the way they loved Amanda. Growing up, Amanda had been the golden child, the straight-A student, the homecoming queen, the one who could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I was invisible. I was the quiet one, the one who stayed out of trouble, who never demanded attention. I thought being the easy child would make them appreciate me, but instead, it just made me fade further into the background. As the lawyer closed the folder and gave us a solemn nod, I couldn't stop the thought. Even in death, they chose her. They didn't just give her more, they gave her everything, and they left me with nothing. I forced myself to stay seated a little longer, but inside, my heart was shattering. It wasn't about the money, not really. It wasn't about the mansion or the land or the jewelry. It was about what it symbolized. My parents had made their final statement, and it was loud and clear. Amanda mattered. I didn't. When the meeting ended, Amanda stood up gracefully, smoothed her dress, and thanked the lawyer with a practiced politeness. Then she turned to me, her lips curling into a smile that sent chills down my spine. "Don't take it personally," she said softly, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "You know Mom and Dad always felt you were independent. You don't need this the way I do." Her words twisted the knife already lodged in my chest. I wanted to believe she didn't mean it, that maybe she was just trying to rationalize what happened, but the glimmer in her eyes told me otherwise. She was enjoying this. She wanted me to feel small, unwanted, forgotten. I walked out of that office in a daze. The sunlight outside was too bright, the city too loud. People were laughing, walking their dogs, sipping coffee, living their lives, completely unaware that my world had just collapsed. I wanted to scream at them, shake them, tell them that everything I believed about family and fairness had just been proven wrong. I went home that night and sat in the nursery where my daughter used to sleep when she was a baby. I held one of her old blankets in my lap and cried until my chest ached. Because it wasn't just about the inheritance. It was about years of being the second choice, years of giving love and loyalty to parents who, in the end, couldn't even leave me a handwritten note. For days after, I replayed it over and over in my head. Why hadn't they included me? Did I do something wrong? Was I such a disappointment that even in death, they couldn't acknowledge me? Or was it simply that they had always chosen Amanda and always would? I tried to talk to my husband about it, but even his comforting words couldn't fill the hollow ache inside me. He told me I didn't need their money, that we were fine on our own, that my worth wasn't measured by what they left behind. And I knew he was right. logically. But emotionally, the wound ran too deep. It wasn't about being fine. It was about being wanted, about being loved. One evening, I found myself flipping through old photo albums. Page after page, Amanda was front and center. Birthday cakes, school plays, vacations. She was always the shining star, the one held close, the one celebrated. And me? I was there too, but always in the background, off to the side, half hidden. Even in the photos, my invisibility was undeniable. The will was just the final confirmation of what had been true my whole life. I was never really part of the family, not in the way Amanda was. My parents had made their choice long ago. But sitting there with the album in my lap, another thought began to take root. A dark, painful thought I didn't want to face. Maybe Amanda hadn't just been lucky. Maybe she had influenced them, manipulated them, made sure she was the one they loved most. That smile in the lawyer's office hadn't been shock, it had been victory. And suddenly, I began to wonder if this betrayal wasn't just my parents' doing, but hers. When I left the lawyer's office that day, it felt like the air outside had a different weight to it. My chest was tight, like someone had strapped a heavy stone to me, and no matter how deeply I breathed, I couldn't shake it. The city moved on around me. Cars honked, people rushed past with their coffee cups. The world spun on, but I felt frozen, suspended in some cruel joke that I couldn't yet understand. My parents were gone, and with them went not just any hope of reconciliation, but also any recognition that I had ever mattered to them at all. I sat in my car for a long time after my sister strutted away, clutching the lawyer's folder like it was her victory trophy. I didn't even start the engine. I just stared through the windshield, numb, replaying the words of the will in my head like a broken record. All assets, properties, and financial accounts to my daughter, Elaine. My sister's name was everywhere. Mine was nowhere. Not even a single line. Not even a small acknowledgement like, "We love you." The silence of my absence in that will was louder than any words they could have spoken. It wasn't the money, though of course the number was staggering, $150 million, an amount that could change generations. But it wasn't the zeros that cut me open. It was the choice behind them, the deliberate way they had decided that my sister was worth everything and I was worth nothing. It made me question every memory I had, every hug, every smile, every "I love you" from them. Were those words real, or were they just placations, fillers to keep me believing I was part of something I clearly never was? When I finally pulled myself together enough to drive home, I didn't even remember the roads I took. My hands just moved on instinct while my mind spun out of control. I thought about birthdays where my sister always got the bigger cake. I thought about Christmas mornings when her pile of gifts towered over mine. I thought about my graduation where they smiled politely but didn't look nearly as proud as they did when my sister received hers. These little memories, ones I had brushed aside before as me being too sensitive, now came back like flashing neon signs. Maybe the truth had always been there, and I was just too naive or too desperate to see it. When I got home, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing, until my husband placed a cup of tea in front of me. He didn't press me at first, just sat down beside me, waiting. He had always been my anchor, the one who steadied me when my family made me doubt myself. Eventually, he asked softly, "How did it go?" That simple question cracked something inside me. "They left everything to Elaine," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Everything. I didn't even exist in their will." He looked at me, shocked at first, then angry. I saw his jaw tighten, his hands clench. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," I said, the tears finally spilling over. Not even a single word, not even a single keepsake, nothing. He reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "That's cruel. I don't understand how they could do that to you." Neither did I. I kept trying to find some reason, some explanation that would make sense. Maybe there was a hidden clause. Maybe they thought I didn't need the money as much. Maybe the lawyer had misread something. But deep down, I knew there was no mistake. My sister's smug smile as she walked out of that office was proof enough. She knew. She had always known. The following days blurred together in a haze of grief and anger. People talk about losing loved ones and going through the stages of grief, but no one talks about grieving parents who were alive long enough to betray you even after their deaths. I wasn't just grieving their loss. I was grieving the truth that they never valued me the way they did my sister. Friends called to check in. Some even said things like, "Maybe your parents thought Elaine needed it more," or "They probably assumed you're doing fine." Those words were meant to comfort, but they only deepened the wound, because that wasn't the point. The point wasn't whether I needed the money. The point was that they had made a choice that erased me completely. I started having nightmares. I'd dream of walking into my childhood home only to find all the pictures on the walls were of Elaine, none of me. I'd flip through albums where every page was her face, her milestones, her life. And when I'd ask where my pictures were, the dream version of my parents would just shrug and say, "You didn't matter enough." I'd wake up gasping, my pillow wet with tears, my chest aching. It began to eat away at me. I started avoiding mirrors because every time I saw my reflection, I felt like I was staring at someone unworthy. I questioned everything, my worth as a daughter, as a mother, as a person. If my own parents couldn't love me equally, what did that say about me? One night, while I sat at the kitchen table again, staring blankly at the same spot on the wall, my husband sat down across from me and said something that shifted the ground beneath me. He said, "Listen, what they did was wrong, but it doesn't define you. Their choices say more about them than they ever say about you. You're not less worthy because of their blindness. If anything, it proves their love was conditional, and conditional love isn't real love." The following weekend, I saw my sister again. She came to the family home to start sorting through my parents' belongings. Her belongings, technically, since everything was now hers. She walked through the halls with this air of ownership, almost daring me to say something. At one point, she picked up our mother's pearl necklace and put it around her own neck, admiring her reflection in the mirror. "You always wanted this, didn't you?" she said casually, glancing at me. "Too bad Mom left it to me. But don't worry, you'll get over it." Her words stung like acid, not because I cared about the necklace, but because she knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted me to hurt. She wanted me to know that she had won. That's when it hit me like a cold slap. This wasn't just about my parents. My sister had been a part of this. Maybe she had influenced them. Maybe she had whispered into their ears for years about how much she needed their support, how strong I was, how I didn't require anything. Maybe she had orchestrated this entire outcome long before they passed. The realization left me shaking with anger. For so long, I had looked at my sister as just the favorite child, but now I saw her for what she truly was, a manipulator, someone who had always known how to bend our parents to her will, and they let her. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, asking myself the same question over and over. What do I do now? Do I fight for what's rightfully mine? Do I cut ties and walk away from it all? Or do I find another way to reclaim the pieces of myself that my parents tried to erase? For the first time in days, I felt something other than despair. I felt a flicker of determination. Because while they may have taken the money, the estate, the legacy, I wasn't going to let them take me. I didn't know exactly what I would do next, but I knew one thing. This story wasn't over. Not yet. I thought that time would soften the pain. People always say grief fades, that anger burns out, that life eventually moves forward no matter how deep the wound. But the thing about betrayal, especially from your own parents, is that it plants itself in your heart like a thorn you can never quite pull out. Every attempt to move on only reminds you it's still there, lodged deeper, sharper, impossible to ignore. That was exactly how I felt months after sitting in that lawyer's office, staring at the will that excluded me from the family I thought I belonged to. At first, I told myself I'd heal. I tried distractions. I buried myself in work, throwing long hours at my job, telling myself that the money I earned with my own hands would taste sweeter than any inheritance ever could. I smiled when colleagues praised my dedication, but behind the smile, I carried an emptiness that felt heavier each day. Because deep down, it wasn't about the money. It was about the message my parents left me with, that I wasn't worthy of acknowledgment. That even after decades of being their child, I didn't matter enough to be included in their final goodbye. My sister, meanwhile, blossomed. She moved into the estate's mansion like she had been rehearsing her whole life for it. Social media became her stage. Pictures of her walking through marble halls, sipping wine on the balcony, smiling in designer clothes with captions like, "Hard work pays off." Hard work. The irony wasn't lost on me. I knew better than anyone that she hadn't worked a single day for that luxury. It was handed to her, tied in a bow, funded by years of my parents' favoritism. Seeing those posts wasn't just painful, it was humiliating, because each one felt like a taunt, a reminder that my absence in their will wasn't an accident, but a declaration. Friends tried to comfort me. Some said, "Maybe your parents trusted you to be independent." Others whispered theories. Maybe they thought I didn't need the money. Maybe they had reasons I'd never understand. But all those words only twisted the knife deeper, because what they were really saying was, accept it. Your parents didn't choose you. And how could I accept something so brutal? How could I carry on like it was normal, when the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally had made such a cruel final choice? I began replaying memories from my childhood, desperate to piece together clues. Had I missed the signs? I remember birthdays where my sister's gifts towered over mine, holidays where she was praised at the dinner table while my achievements were brushed aside with polite nods. I thought at the time that it was just favoritism, something many families wrestle with. But now, looking back with fresh eyes, I realized it was more than that. It was a pattern, a lifelong dismissal of who I was. Their will wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the inevitable conclusion of years where I had been invisible in my own home. One memory stood out more than the rest. I must have been around 12. I had written a short story for a school contest and won first prize. I remember clutching the certificate in my hands, heart racing with pride, rushing home to show my parents. My dad smiled briefly, muttered, "That's nice," and went back to his newspaper. My mom barely looked up from the stove. But when my sister walked in later, talking about trying out for cheerleading, they lit up like fireworks. I stood there, invisible, my little paper crumpling in my hands. That memory came back to me now with brutal clarity. Maybe the truth was they had been preparing me my whole life to expect nothing. As months turned into a year, my bitterness hardened. I avoided family gatherings, not that I was invited to many anymore. My sister, now fully immersed in her role as heiress, began hosting lavish parties at the mansion. Pictures of chandeliers, banquets, expensive cars parked outside. It was like watching a movie I had no part in. Some relatives reached out, gently suggesting I should let it go. But how do you let go of your entire identity? Of the people who were supposed to anchor you in this world, now leaving you adrift? The turning point came one afternoon when I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She hesitated when she saw me, then asked softly, "How are you holding up, dear? I still can't believe what your parents did. Everyone thought you'd at least get something." Her words stung, not because of the sympathy, but because of the confirmation that this wasn't just my pain. It was something everyone saw. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't exaggerating. Even outsiders recognized the cruelty of what had happened. I left the store that day with groceries in my bag and a storm in my chest. That was when I realized I had two choices: let their decision define me forever, or redefine myself without them. So I started rebuilding,
Not in grand, flashy ways like my sister, but in quiet steps. I invested more time in friendships that had always supported me. I reconnected with mentors from school who reminded me of my worth. Slowly, I began to see that my identity didn't have to be tethered to my parents' approval. Their rejection had wounded me, but it didn't have to dictate the rest of my life. The more I leaned into this realization, the lighter I felt. It wasn't forgiveness, maybe not ever, but it was strength. Still, the pain lingered. At night, I'd lay awake haunted by unanswered questions. Did they ever love me? Or was I just a duty, an obligation they never wanted but couldn't abandon? Did my sister know the truth all along, or was she simply complicit in enjoying her role as the chosen one? I may never get answers. My parents took them to the grave, sealing their silence with ink on a will that erased me from their legacy. But maybe answers weren't the point. Maybe survival was. The irony is, the estate that tore me apart also freed me. By leaving me nothing, my parents severed the last tie that bound me to their control. I had nothing from them. No land, no money, no trinkets to hold on to. And so, for the first time in my life, I was forced to stand entirely on my own. It was terrifying, but it was also liberating. Because now, every step I took, every success I built, every joy I created, it was mine. Not a handout, not a favor, not an inheritance tied to strings of obligation. Just me. And maybe, in the strangest, cruelest way, that was the gift they never intended to give me.